And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostick alongside Katie Greifeld taking you through to that closing bell with a global simulcast. Massar and Tim Stenovec join us right now. Welcome to our audiences across all of our Bloomberg platforms, television, radio, our partnership with YouTube. A bit of a flip-flop from what we saw yesterday, Massar, with stocks on the back foot, though some of this seems to be tied to fears about what might be going on over in the Middle East.
Yeah, we've definitely seen gold move up above 5,000 again today. We saw WTI and oil futures, the energy markets reacting. So there is some fear. Geopolitical, once again, kind of putting some nervousness back into the trade here.
Yeah, gold hovering around $5,000 an ounce. Bitcoin, though, which some argue is digital gold, other people, Katie, argue it's not anything, is at about $67,000, up it's close to $800 right now.
Yeah, fewer and fewer people arguing it's digital gold, especially when you take a look at the correlations between Bitcoin and gold. I will point out when it comes to this overall equity market, not too much in the way of volume. You know, maybe we'll see a little bit more when we get those GDP figures, and certainly next week when we finally get those NVIDIA earnings.
Absolutely, and at least in the here and now, we are keeping an eye on the economy as well. We got those trade figures this morning. You had some encouraging economic data earlier in the week, and we get that GDP report that basically will show how the fourth quarter, the last 3 months of the year, shook out. Expectations pretty high for that, 2.7% growth, which for an economy our size is nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah, until we get to that next Fed meeting, right? We've got to live from economic report to economic report.
The president also on the ground today in Georgia, expecting a speech from him later this afternoon, ostensibly about the economy and affordability, according to the White House. Right across the screen for most of the major indices here in the United States as we get the closing bells, with the S&P dropping about 20 points, or roughly about 0.3%. The Dow Jones shedding about 270 points, or about a half a percentage point. The NASDAQ down 0.3%. And one of the few bright spots out there today, and it's a minor one, is the Russell 2000, higher actually on the day by about 6 points, or 0.25%.
Ah, that is interesting. All right, let's go back, though, to the S&P 500, if I may. And you did see most names in the index lower today, Katie, about 297 losing ground on this Thursday, 202 to the upside, and 4 unchanged.
Certainly more losers than winners when it comes to what the Circle has to say. You can see a lot of red on the screen. In terms of what did perform well, utilities higher by more than 1%. You could also read that pretty defensively as well. You also are highlighting industrials there, higher by about 0.8%. Energy higher on the day as well, as we sort of parse through some of those geopolitical concerns. In terms of what your biggest losers were, financials down about 0.9%, followed by tech and consumer discretionary shares.
All right. Well, we are getting some earnings, not necessarily the biggest earnings in the world, but we sort of walk through them to give a broader read here on what's going on in the broader economy, and more importantly, specifically in the tech space. Akamai, which I guess makes a lot of the pipelines, if you will, of the internet, reporting adjusted EPS that did beat $1.84 versus street estimates of $1.76. Revenue in line at about $1.1 billion. But for the full year, 2026, the company says expect revenue in a range of $4.4 to $4.55 billion. The low end of that range is in line with the average of analyst estimates. And for the current quarter, the fiscal first quarter, the company sees adjusted EPS in a range of $1.50 to $1.67. That might be why the shares are down. The street was looking for $1.75, so the top end of that range, significantly below the average of analyst estimates.
Yeah, Akamai is up about 25% here in 2026, but definitely a haircut if you look at that aftermarket trade. So continuing to track that one. Hey, let's go to some of the individual gainers, if we may. Omnicom. We were breaking down the advertising and marketing company about 24 hours ago. It came out after the close, and this is your number one gainer in the S&P 500, a gain of about 15% here. Biggest intraday move that we've seen since about February 2022. So this is a pretty substantial move in this name. The company did report fourth quarter revenue that beat consensus estimates. Company's board also authorized a $5 billion share buyback, and so we definitely have seen investors moving into this one. Let's move on over to the number two gainer in the S&P 500. We're talking about Deere, a gain of just shy of 12%. It's the world's largest farm machinery maker, and it did boost its annual profit outlook, anticipating a long-awaited upturn in the agriculture economy. So the company increased its outlook for small agriculture and turf, as well as construction and forestry, but its largest segment of production and precision agriculture they did point out remains under pressure. And then just got to mention Etsy. We were talking about this one too 24 hours ago. Etsy as high as almost 13% intraday, but finishing with a gain of about 9%.
Yeah.
The online marketplace reported its fourth quarter results, but also a very big impact of the company's deal to sell its Depop business to eBay for about $1.2 billion. Yes, Romaine?
I thought you were going to do the third biggest gainer in the S&P. You did the first, the second, but you skipped over the third. And quite frankly,
I'm
the
not a
last
1, 2, 3 kind of gal. You should know that.
Well, there you
What
go.
was it going to? What is it, Romaine? Why don't you do
It's
it?
Texas-specific land. It was up 10% here on the day. And Katie Greifeld, speaking of Texas, I think there's some earnings out also.
Speaking of
Texas.
Texas, this coming from Texas Roadhouse. That's right. We do have their
Two
earnings
companies
here.
known for their role in Texas.
You were hoping for that
Roadhouse.
Texas segue.
There's literally Texas in the name. Let's talk about some of these numbers here. Fourth quarter revenue coming in a bit light, $1.48 billion. The estimate was for $1.5 billion. EPS also coming in a little bit below the year-over-year figure, $1.28 versus $1.73 a year ago. So missing when it comes to its EPS there. It's interesting. They are raising their dividend here. They do see 2026 commodity cost inflation about 7%. We know that is a big deal specifically for a lot of these names in the restaurant industry. And you can see shares down about 0.8%, as we start to parse through some of these numbers here.
Well, let's look at some of the worst performers in the S&P 500 today. Weighing down the index, Booking Holdings, among the biggest drags today. Shares fell to their lowest level intraday, at least going back to September of 2024. Shares ended up closing down by more than 6.1%. The company reported fourth quarter adjusted EPS below expectations. The rest of the results, though, largely above consensus. This is a stock that's $4,000. The company gave a growth forecast, approved a 25-to-1 stock split. D.A. Davidson, Cantor, KeyBank, all among the firms that cut their price targets after earnings. Also, keep an eye on what happened today with Blue Owl Capital. Shares taking a hit after the company decided to restrict withdrawals from one of its private credit funds. It raises concerns about the entire private credit industry, a $1.8 trillion market. Shares down today by 6%. The firm said investors in Blue Owl Capital Corp. 2 will no longer be able to redeem shares on a quarterly basis, and the fund will return capital through periodic distributions funded by loan repayments, asset sales, or other transactions. And finally, watching what's going on today with shares of Klarna Group. They fell by more than 26%. Let's just round that down. Round it up. 27%.
Come on.
This after the company reported 2 consecutive quarters of losses. It's struggling to convince investors to hold on for future profit. Pre-tax loss of $241 million for the last year, despite pulling in record revenue. It set aside more money for potentially souring loans. So I don't know if that's a commentary about the customers of Klarna that it serves around the world.
Yeah, I'm actually intrigued by that story because wasn't the whole idea is that given the short-term nature of these loans, they weren't carrying as much credit risk as maybe traditional banks were, but definitely something to look into.
That's a big hahaircut today, 27%.
Yeah, it is. It's huge. Just real quickly.
That's going bald.
Tim, what's going on over there?
That's not a haircut. That's going bald. That's a big drop.
That's a full shave.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. Okay, go ahead, Romaine. Take it away.
Okay, are you done? Okay. All right, just real quickly here. Yields, no one cares. Anyway, actually you should care because we did actually see for a third straight day the shorter end of the curve, the 2-year yield higher, modestly to be sure here, but that's going to be a big issue, of course, heading into the next few weeks as we kind of count down to that next Fed meeting. A lot of concerns right now about the potential impact of inflation, particularly as it relates to geopolitics and whether that ends up weighing on it as well. Carol.
I actually think you guys have something to share with us.
We do.
Great. Let's get into this because I feel like.
Get into it.
Yeah, go
Really
ahead.
What's your
quickly here,
prediction?
prediction markets, it feels like they are eating everything. It's hard to have a conversation without them being mentioned in some form. A really interesting partnership announced today between Tradeweb Markets, which is really all about fixed income trading, signing a deal to bring Kalshi's prediction markets and their event-based contracts, their prices, to Tradeweb. This is really interesting, and I think it just goes to show how ubiquitous prediction markets are becoming. And again, it's interesting to see this specifically from Tradeweb, which again is known for its bond trading, not exactly spiritually similar to what we're seeing on these prediction markets.
How big of a market is this, and how big of a market is this going to be? There are so many places where people can, at this point, place their bets or make their predictions. Is there enough of that to go around to all these companies that are getting in on it?
I don't know. It seems like this is a something that's quickly growing. I mean, you've seen the response from some of these equity exchanges, now from, of course, TradeWebs and some of these debt trading platforms, and certainly from the traditional sports books.
I guess I would say ubiquitous doesn't mean necessarily it's the right way forward, but I guess we're going to wait and see. I'm assuming regulators at some point are going to get involved in all of this a little bit more.
Remain so quiet.
Why are you so quiet?
I'm ready to go, Carol.
Oh, I can tell.